I'm Justin Keay, Field Specialist in Horticulture for MU Extension, and I'm here today to give you a crop highlight on asparagus. Many vegetable growers rely on annual vegetable production to supply fresh market sales for farmers markets and CSAs. Growers might also be interested in establishing perennial vegetables to add to their crop lineup. Although asparagus has high initial establishment cost per acre, once it's established, it's one of the lowest cost perennial vegetables to maintain. These plantings can last for quite some time, for up to 15 to 20 years with proper maintenance and care. And there is growing demand for fresh market asparagus. And we've seen a huge increase in asparagus consumption from 2000 to 2018. As with any crop, cultivar or variety selection is really key. It's important to note that asparagus is a dioecious plant producing separate male and female plants, and the older cultivars are generally a mixture of both male and female plants. With the development of all male hybrids, this eliminates the problem of seed production and volunteer asparagus, which can become a weed in the asparagus patch. And these new hybrids have better performance and yield, as well as resistance to some of the most common asparagus diseases, such as fusarium root and crown rot, as well as rust. The Jersey cultivars have been popular for quite some time, but these may no longer be available to growers within the next several years, as the breeder for these varieties has announced they will be discontinuing production and sale. Variety trials have begun in several states on new hybrid varieties, but more research is needed. Purdue has done some initial hybrid variety trials, which they have some 2020 data for. The Walker Deluxe variety so far has been the best yield and performance, but you can check out the link for this new asparagus variety and sources report. We'll include that in the YouTube description below this video. With establishment of a perennial crop like asparagus, site preparation and site selection is really key. Site preparation really needs to begin 1 year prior to planting. So if asparagus is planted generally in the spring, you'll need to think about preparing that site 1 year prior to that. Asparagus is very intolerant of wide pH. It really prefers a narrow pH range, about 6.6. So soil testing is really important so you can understand your pH and get that adjusted. And you'll also need to get both pre-plant fertility recommendations as well as annual fertility recommendations to manage that planting. Most important thing about site selection is that soil drainage is really key. So medium textured loam soils, sandy loam soils are preferred. This crop does not tolerate flooding or sitting and standing water that can cause a complete crop failure. So make sure that your site is not going to be dealing with any of those issues. Asparagus also competes very poorly with weeds. So one thing that's suggested in that year prior to planting is really developing a strategy to manage weeds. This could use things like cover crops to smother weeds. It could also involve cultivation and herbicide use to help break down that weed seed bank and kill any perennial weeds that are already established on that site. Planting disease-free crowns is key. You want to make sure you're sourcing your crowns from a reputable supplier. These are generally planted between 9,000 and 12,000 per acre. The 1-year-old crowns are planted about 6 inches deep into a furrow. In Missouri, this generally occurs late March through mid-April, but it's important to make sure that your soil temperature is at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Planting below these temperatures can cause severe disease issues. Within the row, the plants are generally spaced about 12 to 18 inches and then about 5 to 6 feet between the rows. After the crowns are laid in the furrows, you're going to want to cover them with about 2 inches of soil, and then gradually over the course of that initial year, you're going to go ahead and fill that furrow completely. You can take a look at the image on the right to see what that looks like. Irrigation is really important for those first 2 to 3 seasons to develop good root structure as well as above ground foliage production. And irrigation is recommended each year after that to maintain soil moisture. If you have a dry spring, irrigation will be really important. And we want to encourage strong fern growth after the harvest period so that we have production of a large amount of spears the following season. With weed management, it's really important to stay on top of this with asparagus. It does not provide dense foliage to shade out weeds. Shallow cultivation is recommended so you don't damage the crowns. You can also use mulch or a combination of cultivation mulch and herbicides. Asparagus beetle is the most economically damaging beetle on the asparagus crop, feeding on the ferns as well as laying eggs on the spear tips. Your biggest control for diseases is going to be sourcing disease-free crowns as well as selecting disease-resistant or tolerant cultivars. You can consult the Midwest Vegetable Production Guide for herbicides as well as insecticides that are labeled for use on asparagus. Asparagus should not be harvested in the planting year. You want to give it time to establish, grow large ferns, and feed the root system of that plant. The yield of an asparagus crop always correlates to the previous year's fern growth. So a good rule of thumb for harvesting asparagus, you want to harvest it for about 1 week the first year of harvest after planting, 2 weeks in the second year of harvest, 3 weeks for the third year of harvest, 4 weeks in the fourth year, and then 6 to 7 weeks in all of the following years. The harvested spears should be about 7 to 9 inches tall, and you want to cool these down very quickly after harvest to make sure to maximize shelf life. In general, the harvest window in southern Missouri is April 15th to May 30th, and April 20th to June 5th in northern Missouri. These harvest windows can vary depending on weather conditions, but you want to stop harvesting when the majority of the emerged spears are 3/8 inch diameter or less. That's about the diameter of a pencil. At this point, you want to go ahead and let the ferns grow. They'll grow until a hard frost. They can be mowed in the fall, or sometimes people will leave them on until the following spring. If they're left on to the following spring, just make sure that they're mowed 2 to 3 weeks prior to harvest. There's some good resources on growing asparagus. We have one from MU Extension. There's also a great one from Penn State that includes sample budgets, one from University of Kentucky on commercial asparagus production, and then another one on new asparagus varieties and sources. We'll include the links to all these in the YouTube video description. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.